Hi, this is Dr. Brandy Raymond, and welcome to another episode of Deep Medicine. I'm coming to you from Costa Rica. This is where I have my office and my clinic at, and where I do kind of the headquarters of my work. So today we're going to be discussing what it's like to do the intake process with me, because many of the people that I see don't ever actually come to Costa Rica. I see a lot of people online, and so I do a lot of this work online. And a big conversation that I have with people, guests, patients, clients, is about blood work, because a lot of people come to me saying, I'm not feeling well, but my blood work is normal, so I don't, the doctors aren't really telling me what to do other than take an antidepressant or something like that. And they're like, it's not that I feel depressed, I just feel off. And so I just kind of wanted to address some of those concerns or questions and explain why I do things the way I do them. So one of the main things I can say about blood work in general is that most labs have different ranges of what they consider to be normal. And so that can be problematic because it depends on what hospital or what lab that you go to do your blood draws in. Depends, they set their own ranges. And so what may be normal in Miami is not normal in Nebraska. And there appears to be no governing body that makes all the labs have the same ranges. So that's something that can be a little challenging just right off the bat. Secondly, the body's job is to keep your blood as nutrient dense as possible, because it understands that the blood is what's traveling everywhere and nourishing everything. So your body's constantly doing this dance between your bones and your organs of transmuting nutrients back and forth to keep the blood as nutrient dense as possible. So when you get blood work done, they're extracting the blood in that snapshot of a moment, and all that's really reflecting is the dance that's going on between your bones and your organs. It doesn't tell you really if your organs are deficient in something at that moment or if your bones are deficient in something in that moment, because they have been giving everything to your blood. So by the time you actually see something outside of the normal range on your blood work, it's pretty significant, and it's been going on for quite some time that your body is unable to continue to give from your bones or your organs to make up for those imbalances. So what I like to do to kind of do an initial assessment for people from that standpoint is I have a couple different things that I like to do. There is some blood work that I have sent right to your door, a little thing that you put on your arm, and it takes a little blood and it sends it into the lab, and then they test for a lot broader spectrum things than your average blood work. Because that's kind of the other thing, like when you go to the doctor and you're like, I'm feeling off, they're like, well, let's look at your red blood cells and your white blood cells and maybe something, related to your liver. And then if they find something off, then they have to dig a little bit further. Whereas this panel looks a little bit broader. It's like, yes, of course, your red blood cells, your white blood cells, we want to know how your immune system's functioning and if you're anemic and things like that. But also your liver, your hormones, your thyroid, it's a little more comprehensive. So I like that one a lot. Also, I send people to their house the DNA analysis. And that's just, you put a couple of drops of blood on a card and they send that in, and it sends back this really amazing report that tells you what foods you're sensitive to, how you digest, what kind of exercise you should do, what your sleeping rhythms should be, just a bunch of information that's really helpful in understanding how you specifically genetically should be operating in the world. So I like to start with those two, and then I've got some energetic scanners, we'll call them. It's like a type of frequency medicine. One is a bioquantum scanner, and the other one's called a Hunter scanner. And one works on magnetic resonance, like an MRI, but instead of creating an image, you get a written report of all the different imbalances and things that are going on. And then the Meta Hunter scanner kind of works with more of light and is able to detect different frequencies of light that are in the body that tell us how your various systems are working, and it gets all the way down to the DNA level of different organs if things are off. Then I take the information, also including our conversational intake. I gain so much information from people just by talking to them about their health, physically, yes, but also mentally, emotionally, spiritually. A lot of doctors don't take those things into account when they're looking at your labs. It's just this black and white report. But what modern neuroscience is teaching us, what ancient wisdom, meditation, Qigong, Chinese medicine, Ayurveda, what they all have in common and agreement is that your mind 100% impacts your reality and your health. And so I have to, I spend a couple of hours, sometimes 2-3 hours, talking to people about what's going on in their world. What's their living situation? What are they eating? Who are they talking to every day? Do they like their job? Do they like where they're at? Are they happy with life choices? Because all of that impacts the way your body works. I take all that information together and then start to compile, what is the root cause of this particular imbalance. And what I really like about, the DNA analysis is great because it's just a roadmap for your life, and that's lovely. We should all get that at birth as a gift. And then there's the scanners that I use, I really appreciate because they're much more subtle. So I'm able to pick up on excesses and deficiencies and things that aren't working long before they become a real, actual, tangible problem, or full-on disease or something like that. So that's kind of in a nutshell what I like to do for diagnostic work before I even start doing any of the therapies that I offer. So the main 4 things that you get out of the DNA core. Now with this company, there are 60, 70 different things you can look at in correlation to your DNA and how it's expressed. And remember, DNA is not the end-all be-all, right? So DNA is the gun, but your lifestyle choices is the trigger. You can have terrible genetics, but if you take good care of yourself and you think good thoughts and you do good things, then that stuff doesn't express itself. So it's really important to remember that when you get these reports, it's not like saying, this is it for life, you're stuck with these things. No, your DNA can be turned on and off. We know that now without a doubt. But this DNA report in particular shows your biological processes. Now this is like how you break down B vitamins or how you absorb folate, or just different processes in the body, like are you insulin sensitive or not, do you have a predisposition to diabetes or heart disease or cancer risk, all of that can be seen in your genetics. And even if it says yes, you are predisposed to breast cancer, all right, well then let me do some things to ensure I don't get that. And they're simple things. Regulating your emotions, a lot of breast cancer is related to a repression of anger and frustration and not expressing yourself, or wearing bras that are too tight, cutting off circulation, reducing the flow of lymph, which is the stuff that gets the toxins out of there. So a lot of that stuff can be turned around if caught early enough and change some basic lifestyle habits. Another area that it looks at is nutrition. 1, how well you absorb all the vitamins, but 2, what you should and shouldn't be eating. It's like an allergy panel, basically. Weight management. So this is how prone you are to storing fats, or how quickly you run through protein, or how much carbohydrates you need. All of that stuff is kind of written in our DNA. And then your exercise response. So some people do really well with endurance sports or long distance things, and some people are meant to be a bit more sedentary. Some people do better with 30 minutes of moderate intensity 3 times a week. It's kind of all over the map, but this report kind of gives you some direction in those 4 areas. And then from there, if you want any more in-depth looks, there's so many different tests that we can order and do stuff to, all the way down to your dental history is written in your DNA, which I know sounds a little crazy, but it's true. Okay. So the blood work panel that I look at has also 4 different areas of it. So 1 is your hormone balance. So then we're looking at estrogen, estradiol, progesterone, SHBG, TSH, which is thyroid stimulating hormone, and total and free testosterone. Because it's important to know 1, how much you have, and then the other part of that, the free part of it, is how much of that you can actually use. The next section is heart health. So cholesterol, CRP, which is your inflammation markers, and things like that. Then metabolic efficiency. So this is how well you're breaking down iron, using iron, how much ferritin you have in your system, albumin, free T3, which is related to your thyroid, vitamin D levels, triglycerides, which is also kind of a cholesterol, LDL, HDL, yeah, so cholesterol related stuff, and like how you're breaking that stuff down, how you're able to utilize it. So yeah, because cholesterol is, there's been a bit of a myth about it because there's plenty of cultures all over the world that have crazy high levels of cholesterol and they live longer than most Americans. But it, came to the attention of medicine that, we have medications that can reduce your cholesterol. And by the way, all of your nervous tissue and your brain is made of cholesterol. So it's really important that you do have sufficient levels of healthy cholesterol in your system. And unfortunately, a lot of these medications get rid of all cholesterol. They don't, not just the negatively impacted cholesterol. So, you kind of got to be careful when you go down some of these pharmaceutical roads of like what's really normal and what's not, and what's healthy for me in particular and what's not. But that's what I have to say about cholesterol. It's not the big, bad, scary thing that it's been made out to be. It's actually lining every nerve ending that you have. So it's kind of important. And then there's the longevity section, which tells you like your overall score, your personalized baselines, and your biological age based on all the markers that were tested previously mentioned. So it's a good place to start. If stuff comes out of there weird, then we can dig a little deeper with some other tests to see like, well, why is that going on? Because it's one thing to get these results back, and even if they're out of skew, that doesn't tell you why. And if we're really talking about healing and getting to the root of things, we have to find the why and not just put Band-Aids over things or be like, oh, high cholesterol, here's a drug for it. Well, why is there high cholesterol? What kind of cholesterol is it? What is the person eating? How are they eating? Like, there is a big difference between eating the same meal, one in your 30-minute lunch break, sitting in your car, bitching about your job or complaining about the state of affairs in the world while you're consuming these nutrients, or same meal, sitting in a park with someone that you like, laughing and telling jokes. Like, completely different energetics, and those energetics are going to be transmuted into your food, into the way you digest, into the way you feel after the meal. Like, all of that stuff plays a part in our digestion. So it's important to, just because it says high cholesterol, you can't just be like, well, that's it, don't eat fats and take these cholesterol medications. You really got to look into what else is going on and why is it like this? How did we get here and how can we turn it around? It's not common to run a lot of the hormone tests, and it's not common to run like ferritin and different things like that. A couple reasons why. The hormone panels and the ferritin, that does typically tend to impact women more because we have these 28-day cycles, and then we have perimenopause and menopause. So we're just changing around a little bit more than men do, and historically all of the research has just been done on men. So they just really don't know much yet. We're learning more every day, but there's just a lot that's unknown about women and their cycles and hormone levels and what's normal and what's not. So it's not normal to order a lot of these tests for most doctors just because the research isn't there to support it. So it doesn't mean the problems aren't real. It just, we're just not supported by that industry. There are more and more functional doctors or integrative doctors or naturopathic doctors every day that are getting into this stuff, and that's amazing. But if you go into the hospital, they're never going to suggest these things. Partly, there's the men and the woman part where it's like all the research and all the drugs have been tested on and everything has been geared towards men. And so there's just the other half of the population is just understudied, and they get medicated with things that were designed and tested on men. So, and those are two different beings with two different metabolisms and two different hormonal cycles, and everything's just different. So there's that. And then the way the system is set up in the hospitals with insurance, and you have to meet quota as a physician, you have to meet certain quotas and see a certain number of people. And if your only input is all this research on men, where do you even start with learning about what women need and this and that. And then it's with the insurance, you have a very limited amount of time to see people. So they're doing the best they can given the circumstances of that design, I guess we'll call it. If you got maybe 10 minutes with each person, like how can you possibly get into their life story? How can you really listen to all their symptoms? You can't. So they have a list of things they can prescribe, and most of that stuff comes from drug reps who come into the hospitals, to the private clinics or whatever, and say, hey, we have this new drug, it does this thing. They list the top 3 things that it does. They typically tend to leave out the 15 or 20 side effects that it may cause. And doctors are busy, and so they hear the 3 things that it does, they put that in their memory banks, and then somebody comes in and says, I have this, and they're like, boom, here's this new drug, and then they're off to the race. They got to go on to the next thing. The way that system is set up, it just doesn't give them the time to really dig into all of this stuff. And they're holding on to the old system of like, you do your lab work, you get an MRI, you get a CAT scan, you get, that, and that's all there is. They're not as open to embracing some of this new technology. And I'm not saying the technology is always perfect, because it's not. But it's like, that's why I use a few different things, a couple different kind of labs, a couple different kind of scanners, really listening to people, taking the time to get to the root of their mental, emotional, spiritual, physical issues, and then compile all that information together to come up with a plan. So, and also if people come and I do all these other scans and whatnot and stuff is kind of off, then I'm like, well, okay, let's do some blood work too. Let's maybe get an ultrasound. Let's maybe get a CAT scan if you feel like that needs at that level. But again, all that stuff just takes time, and that system just really isn't set up for that. I do think that in Western medicine is very compartmentalized. So they'll say, yeah, I have a heart palpitation, and so you're off to the cardiologist. And then meanwhile, it could have been some kind of lung function issue, but the cardiologist will check your EKG and be like, everything's fine, but not even looking the 3 inches over with the stethoscope to listen to the lungs to see if there was just some kind of fluid in there that was maybe putting pressure on the heart, causing an issue. So the cardiologist will give you a thumbs up, and then you go home thinking everything's great, and then now, this pulmonary disease that you had gets to progress a little bit further until you finally get into a pulmonologist office. I've noticed in my time working in Western medicine, like everybody who is a specialist, which is pretty much all doctors at this point, obviously they want to think their way is the way. They've been training in their thing the whole time, so they're like, I know best for this particular system, and they may know best for that particular system, but until the day everybody who's seeing somebody can sit down at the table together, put their egos aside for a second, and discuss this person's case from all sides, like, we're kind of in a bit of a pickle. Because with the lack of communication between cardiology, pulmonology, nephrology, the liver guy, we're seeing the body as like separate systems, when in fact it is one whole being. I mean, everything in our bodies at least is connected. Now, I believe that goes even further, and that we're all connected to everything on the planet and everybody, but that's a conversation for another time, I guess. But for sure, we can all agree that if it's inside your body, in your rib cage, in your abdomen, in your body, anywhere, that it is all connected. And so we have to start looking at people as a whole and not just a pile of separate systems that are completely independent. First of all, a lot of the lab parameters, and also what vitamins and minerals that they think that are within the normal limits, are just enough to avoid disease, and they're not necessarily enough to optimize health. So those are like 2 different things, but they don't really have the time, again, because there's just so many people to see in such a small amount of time to really like talk to everybody about health optimization. They're just like disease avoidance in a way. Or if they can't find anything, it's like, well, moving on to the next person who has a thing that I can do something about, be it surgery, chemo, radiation, dialysis, transplant list. Those are the bigger money makers for them, and it is a business. Medicine is a business now. And so they're looking to go down that road, or pharmaceuticals, because once you get people on a lot of these drugs, they have to be on them forever. And so they want to get people on that. And it's way easier to just give somebody a pill and tell them to go home, like, than it is to be like, okay, let's look at what's really going on and where's the underlying deficiencies and how can we optimize your health. Like, that takes time and empathy and the ability to listen. And that isn't really the way that system is set up to operate. And look, I think Western medicine is amazing at trauma care, the emergency room. I mean, life-saving stuff happens in there all the time. That's wonderful. But then there's this whole other side of like preventative medicine, mental health, that's just not even really discussed. I mean, it's just like, oh, you're not feeling good? Well, here's a Zoloft or whatever, and go home and just take it. Never do they say, like, do you want to resolve these issues, and how do you want to resolve them, and what are we going to do about it? And they just take these pills forever and it'll be okay. And then you get side effects to those, and then they're like, don't worry, we have another pill for that. And then you develop some other disorder later, because unprocessed emotions 100% of the time lead to disease. And then they kind of just wait for that to happen, and then they'll cut it out or burn you or whatever they have to do. And that's just that model. Most recently, I had someone on the Meta scanner, and for sure all this heart condition stuff came up, and I was like, whoa. And he is an older gentleman, and he had been to everybody he thought he needed to go to back in the States. And then I asked, have you ever been to a cardiologist, because I'm seeing some stuff here? And he was like, no one ever told me I should see a cardiologist. And sure enough, like, so I was like, well, you're going to go see the cardiologist now, because it was significant what I found. It was beyond what I thought I would be able to deal with. And yeah, when he went and they did an angiogram, it was so bad that they were like, we need to do a stent or a bypass or something, like, as quick as possible. So yeah, and I mean, and he had EKGs and whatnot, but nobody ever really looked until then. And so yeah, they do find things that are missed, because the scanners I work with, they scan the whole body. Every organ system is looked at in a pretty short amount of time. So at least it gives me a good place to start. And then we can go further testing, an angiogram or an ultrasound or whatever, to figure out what's going on. And that's kind of the beauty of working with the medical system in Costa Rica, because it's privatized and it's affordable. So if I find something on one of my scanners, people can get an appointment the next day at some of the best hospitals in the world are here. And for under $1,000, you can have your angiogram and ultrasound and all this stuff. And then the doctors here are at least open to having the conversation with me about what protocol this patient is going to want to do. And they're much more flexible here about, like, all right, well, we can do a little bit of this, and diet and lifestyle and and maybe just the lowest amount of this medication, and we'll try and monitor for side effects. And they're open to having the conversation. Whereas I found doctors in the States are just like, that's what you're doing is crazy, and I don't have time for it. And my job is more to help people with diet, the lifestyle, helping them process their thoughts and feelings, like emotional alchemy. I make recommendations to go see other specialists for different things, and I make recommendations for things like stem cells. I mean, there's clinics popping up all over the world that are doing amazing work, and I make recommendations for hyperbaric chambers and EBOO and just all kinds of different stuff. And then I help people. If I don't do those things myself, I help them find people who do, that it's close to them. So I'm kind of more of a health manager. I look at it from all the different angles, and then put together a report of, here's what I think is going on, and then just talk to the patient, like, what of this resonates with you? What of this do you think fits you? What of this are you willing to change?